Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Barry Gelston, educator, researcher, and longtime advocate for twice exceptional and neurodivergent learners. Barry's doctoral work formalized the spiral adaptation lens, a framework that redefines how we support complex learners by focusing on adaptive connection, reading a student's real-time cues as invitations to curiosity, not compliance. He's the co-founder of Spiral We, where he's pioneering the Adaptive Connection Intelligence System, or ACIS, which combines educator insight, student reflection, and ethical AI to transform how schools, families, and communities understand developmental asynchrony and hidden strengths. His work highlights how behaviors often misunderstood as defiance or inconsistency can instead be seen as adaptive traits that open pathways for growth. In this conversation, we unpack what twice exceptional really means, why outliers aren't exceptions but prototypes, and how a strength-based lens changes classroom practice for everyone, not just students with diagnoses. Barry shares practical examples of behavior as communication, the power of mutual adaptation, and why iteration, not perfection, is the real engine of learning. We'll also talk about Spiral We's advancements, including the Spiral Lens perspective and the Spiral Insight tool that turns everyday observations into actionable strategies. You can find more information about all of our guests at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Dr. Barry Gelston. Hey, Barry, it is so good to see you. Thank you for joining me again here on Exceptionally Speaking.
It's my pleasure. It's always great to come back here and be with Dr. Meryl. This is a lot of fun.
Well, I am thrilled because I know the first time we talked, we really had more to talk about. And so I want to dig back into twice exceptionality and the approach that you're taking that can really help families and practitioners understand students better and support them better. So before we get started, I'd love for you to just ground us in what your definition is for twice exceptionality.
Well, I go the very simple route because I like to see things simply and then, go from there. But it's a combination of being both gifted and having a learning disability. Now, along the way, there have been extensions of that to maybe include people who are physically disabled. And then there's things like multi-exceptionality, where people start to extend it so that the idea of exceptionalities really comes from special ed. And it's a way to euphemistically say someone has a learning disability or they're a difference. And so, but in the last 5 or so years, it's been used for cultural impacts. So if you're from a different culture, and socially, that cultural impact is different from the system that you're in. That could be a third exceptionality. LGBTQIA folks consider that an additional exceptionality. Dr. Arnstein and I look at it is multi-exceptionality. And matter of fact, in the last podcast that we had together, she talked about kids being 3D, and we talked about it the other day, and we agreed that really not 3D, but they're multi-D, We're so many different things that make up who we are. So to start, E is twice exceptionality, gifted and learning disabled. And I'll riff on this a little bit. The importance of twice exceptionality is that it gives us the chance to see that outliers aren't exceptions. Outliers are not exceptions. They're prototypes. So where we get to look at kids who are twice exceptional, multi-exceptional, multi-D, and all that stuff, what we see is, an expanded image of asynchronous development. And when you look at kids who have asynchronous development, it's hard for teachers, adults, other kids to really get who they are and understand them. And so by looking at the more exaggerated cases where you have kids who are very high IQs and also have met threshold for learning disabilities, that shows significant asynchronous development, and they're very important to support. But they also give us cues to say, kids in general or people in general have a lot of those traits. Not everybody is full-blown, profoundly gifted, but a lot of us are really smart in a lot of different ways, and we're advanced. Last time we were on, I used the example of being really good in math and being very average in English, right?
Right.
Well, that asynchronous development can be anywhere. And you don't have to be, off the charts great in math, but you can be kind of a little bit above average and just a little bit below average in reading, which gives you a false understanding of the child. It's more subtle than it is with a multi-exceptional learner. But what it does is it gives us cues, and we can use the techniques that we practice and learn from twice exceptional kids and multi-exceptionality learners. And then we can take that and start to apply that to the general population. And that's really important for us as we do this, is that we feel strongly that what we're working on is not just a multi-exceptionality or just exceptionally speaking. It's for the whole population. And one more point on this as well, which is that when we talk about outliers and you look at the world as a collection of asynchronous traits, it starts to become interesting to be, well, you know what? There is no mean child. Because if you look at a mean child, not a
And by
nasty,
mean, you
rude
mean
one,
average or rude?
average, pardon me. Actually, you're beating me to the punchline.
Oh, man. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. It means it's effective. So when you look at like an average or a mean, you do so when you look at one dimension, right? But in that one dimension, there may be a set of kids who clump around the middle. But the reality is that when you start to look at all of the different dimensions that make up a learner, that whole measure of central tendency goes away. And every child then becomes an outlier. And it's important for us as educators and parents and even managers at work, friends, anybody with any type of personal relationship, is to know that each person we are connected with is a unique person. And Dr. Nicole Tetrell, one of people I like very much, she has an expression. She refers to everybody as neuro-unique, and that everybody's brain is like a different fingerprint. So I think that accentuates the point that I'm trying to make, and it all kind of comes together.
Okay. So I want to confirm my understanding too. So the way that you're thinking about this is that it's a fallacy to really consider there even being an average developing child, essentially.
Right.
It's just that what we see for outliers are twice exceptional. It's just more visible what we're seeing, but
Right.
it's actually, if we can use that as a prototype to how we approach supporting learning for all students, it can be helpful. Am I on the right track here?
Bingo.
Okay.
That's it. And as I said before, I like things simplified, and to me, that's simplified. And I also want to make a point here for those people who do beat threshold with these things and they do have a more intense experience. This is not one of those things where you say, well, everybody's autistic or everybody's ADHD. No, they're not. People have ADHD traits, people have autistic traits. And as you know, when you look at the diagnostic and statistical manual, you need to have a high level of a grouping of those that go together, and together that high grouping of multiple traits creates an interactive effect, which makes it a very intense experience. So I just want to acknowledge for people out there who are experiencing very intense things from their neurodivergent versus neurodiversity, that they're seen and respected for going through what they're going through.
Absolutely. That makes sense. I like thinking about it in that way as well. And like you're saying, that the research and movement that y'all are making can really impact all students and is not isolated to twice exceptional students or gifted students alone. So I'm wondering, you've worked with twice exceptional students, neurodivergent students for a long time. What really led you to start rethinking how we interpret their behaviors?
Well, I started working with neurodivergent kids back in the 80s, and when autism was really just coming out, and we thought of autism as really kids who were just very, very low IQs and had issues with, only the kids who had self-care issues and not just having problems with the communication, but with being aphasic, right?
Which we would maybe think of now as more outliers when we think of the autism spectrum on really the intensity of autism as you're talking about. But in the 80s, that's what people were looking at and actually treating and thinking about.
Yeah, and just throw in here, that's why a lot of there's misunderstanding in the culture out there is that to them, that's what autism is. They think of autism as a disability because they think of those in that part of the world that have autistic traits. But they don't just have autistic traits, they have they're mutism. They have severe aphasia, so they literally can't speak. They don't just have an issue with communication, they literally can't speak. And some of them not just involved in series and sequential behavior, but they have very intense obsessive compulsive disorder, which is not necessarily true for people who are on the spectrum. So anyhow,
Which, by the way, have you ever heard or listened to the telepathy tapes?
I have not.
Okay, you have to check it out. It's a podcast about non-speaking autistic individuals and really proof that they have psi abilities, telepathic abilities. And there is a lot of overwhelming proof, but you'll appreciate it too from the science lens of like, how do we measure something that's immaterial? And how can we get science to recognize what's happening? Anyway, super fascinating and really goes along with the idea that if you interact with anyone, any human who is nonverbal, that you should assume competence immediately. And that's something that we have to get better at in our culture is just because someone cannot vocally communicate with you does not mean they're incompetent.
So I love what you said that. And I also tell you that the other thing that's really important in this, before I actually answer your question, which is that this perspective is about mixing it in with a strength-based approach, which is what you're talking about. And if you think about what I was describing as a collection of traits, what we know is that working with people through those traits and these asynchronous traits where you have more of some things than others is that we know, like from the work of Susan Bell, that learners not just do better on their strength, but they start to pick up the things that are a challenge for them too. And so they're able to build those other skills. And if we as educators, friends, parents, all those things, right, if we look at others through a strength lens first, we then have a different perspective. And it isn't necessarily, well, autistic people really have superpowers or people with dyslexia have superpowers. It's like, no, they have different powers. And so there's a lot of weird discussion around that too. I don't know why I'm coming back to that, but I feel like those things need to be said.
Yes.
So starting teaching, it wasn't until years later that I learned about twice exceptionality, and I started to work with 2E learners actively and knowingly about 15 years ago, teaching online as Mr. Gelston's one-room schoolhouse. And I didn't really get what it was at first, but I always had a positive and accepting special ed mentality in how I do things, but I also didn't buy into seeing kids as broken. That never worked with me. So I was fortunate that I had that predisposition. And I find that with teachers I speak to who do well, people in our research that do well, start with that predisposition. So I'll give you an example of a student. This is a favorite of mine, although I have a lot of favorite students I've worked with over the years. This one, dyslexic child, and there was a real struggle. And we had to go through a mutual adaptation with each other in supporting their dyslexia.
And what do you mean by mutual adaptation?
Well, I had to learn them and they had to learn me. And it's a partnership and it's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. And for me, I had to go out and read extra books on dyslexia. My favorite was from the IDs of the Dyslexic Advantage. And so it gave me a whole different perspective on how to not fix their dyslexia, but find what works well. So here's an example. Teaching algebra. One of the things that we learn to do is doing equations, and you have learners make a V, right? Not with their hands, but they do the problem out, and then every time they solve, it gets a little bit smaller and smaller until it gets to the bottom. It says X equals 3 or X equals 42, because that's always the answer to everything in the universe.
That's right, 42.
This learner in particular, as a dyslexic learner, had no connection to that whatsoever. It was uncomfortable. It was just did not fit right. And one of the things I learned about working with dyslexic learners is that they have a different way, not a bad way, wrong way, but they have a different way of visualizing what's going on. A lot of dyslexic people are very good at three-dimensional spatial understanding, but in this case, it was trying to grab the spatial piece and also change over time. So I encouraged them to make their own process. So how would you draw this out? And all of a sudden, it was, whoa, they start doing little boxes off to the left, writing things down, and then another box off to the right. And then they're ready for the next step. And then those two boxes meet together somewhere else. And then those come back up again. But They're doing what math teachers want. They're showing their work. We can understand their reasoning, not for the sake of having to write it, because you want them to express their knowledge. So you're trying to get a multi-dimensional experience of learning, right? So here is this learner who would normally be frustrated. Teacher would be, this kid just can't do the basic stuff. We've been doing it this way forever. Why can't they? It's now, holy goodness gracious, look how nicely they're doing this now and how beautifully the flow is happening and how the solution naturally comes out. And in doing that, we took advantage of their strength, the visual strength, and also a new sense of ownership. Because isn't that what as teachers want? We want to see ownership in our learners. And it became their process. And I made it very clear that this is you. You did a great job here. I just gave you the space to do it. And there are so many different examples of this that not just me, but a lot of teachers do. And it's a matter of bottling that and having a single place where people can come back to and share that information with each other. One of the things Karen and I talk about with each other is that all of the concern in teacher training is planning, lesson plans. You work in the class and all of a sudden, you've got to fill out your lesson plan book. You have to always meet scope and sequence. But there's very little to no discussion about how do we mutually adapt with the learner. And it isn't like some weird over-emotional thing, because I don't want to, people be out there like, he's getting all woo-woo on me. And it's like, no, just the opposite. This is just shut up, listen to the kid, and be curious and investigate, and then come back later and experiment. And that actually, I just described is what we call adaptive connection, where you're curious, you do some investigation, and then you try things out, you iterate. I want to talk about iteration for a little bit, if you don't mind.
Please do. Yeah.
One of the things that keeps coming up in the discussions that Dr. Ornstein and I have as we build out the model is this constant importance of iteration. And the problem-solving technique that I described there of curiosity, investigation, and testing things is not the only problem-solving technique. That's just the one that I witnessed. But whatever people do comfortably is what they should do. I'm not prescriptive. In a lot of ways, Spiral We is agnostic on what teachers do and what they use. We just want them to use a spiral adaptive lens, which is being aware that there's all this asynchrony and that we should have a strength-based first approach, and then make this mutually adaptive connection. And that's how it all comes together. Now, iteration is the whole mindset. And when you say mindset, you think of Carol Dweck, right?
Sure.
And with Carol Dweck, it wasn't that she was wrong, but I always felt like she didn't quite get it. And some of the early writing that she did on her research is she found that with students, when she would set them up with different expectations, the kids who originally did well and then told that they were really smart struggled more than the kids who weren't. And she describes a little bit, but never went into it theoretically, which is that the kids, in order to maintain that self-identity, started to do things like cheat and make stuff up and start to, make excuses. And so it always jumps past this whole identity piece. And the identity piece here is that a good learner is an iterative learner. A good worker is an iterative worker. Good software is iterative. And so what do I mean by iterative? Iterative is that you try something, you look at it, see how it came out, and you go, I can make that a little bit better. Good example, an artist. I have a best friend who's a painter. He scrapes and he throws all kinds of stuff on the board, and after a while, he'll scrape it down, make it white, throw some more gloop on top of it. And then by the end of it, he's done so many different things and so many iterations that his paintings have beautiful textures and colors and everything is rich and incredible about this painting. And if he just sat down and was like, I'm going to make a painting right the first time, that's just goofy, right?
Yeah.
Yet we expect ourselves to do that in every part of our life as if that's some model of intelligence. And the kids who suffer from that the most are gifted kids because they feel that they have to be right the first time. Because when they're young, they do get a lot of stuff right the first time. I really do believe there's a lot of biological pre-wiring that allows them to read earlier, to do math better earlier. And even for some kids who are better, more physically coordinated. The assumption is that they're just naturally good at it, but it never comes back to iteration. I'll use another word for iteration, practice, right? So
Yeah.
all of these things are not encouraged. And that to me is the real mindset that we should be focusing on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Definitely part of what you're saying speaks to me when I think about my own schooling experience and like truly how easy elementary school was. And then I got to go to a harder private military middle school, and the work was so much harder. And I was terrified to admit I didn't know something, and I was terrified to ask questions because I had never had to do either of those things in my K-5 experience. And it was uncomfortable. And I even remember socially just like having to force myself to admit I didn't know some pop culture thing was happening, like something so low stakes. But I remember it being pretty debilitating for a while and just having to work through like, no, you don't know everything. And there's so much more to learn. Of course you have questions, and like trying to talk myself out of that. So I know that many of us have experienced that, but also see our gifted students and twice exceptional or just neurodivergent students in general up against that on what expectations have been placed on them, but also just what school has been like. And then really trying to meet kids where they are and help them become comfortable in just what you're saying, the iterative experience of being a human, of trying things, of getting it not right, of trying again. It is a big deal and something that I'm glad that you're really defining and working through, because it's something that we need to approach in a different way.
And it's part of our job is to model that.
Mm-hmm.
So as a math teacher, I still have some math students. And one of the things I do, and it may seem very scary to other math teachers, but I do not pre-work the questions. I will
Okay,
pick
so you can live work through them and potentially make some mistakes or try a
yes,
different tactic.
yes,
And
yes.
okay,
And they can see when I grumble under my breath, smile, and keep moving on. So it's not like I'm always happy that I didn't get it just right. I'm like, God darn it, let's try that again. And then they see me kind of restarting and doing it again. And then when they do that, I support them. And when I go through it, they support me. And all of a sudden, our mutual expectations are different too, because I'm not, the sage on the stage. People love that expression, right? I'm another fellow problem solver who just studied this stuff years ago, and I can come back and help them. But the thing is to take them through the iterative process and to learn the new set of rules or to figure out what the rules are, have them then construct their own knowledge. I mean, that's a big part of what we're doing too, is the assumption here that all of what we're doing here is based on the constructivist approach. And for teachers or those folks who don't know, Piaget and Sikorsky and all those guys, they talked about how it's important that when we learn, it isn't about receiving and collecting data, but we build up some data and then we build out on it, keep constructing our knowledge. And then after a while, you build a nice scheme of all that knowledge. They call it a schema, right? And, Sikorsky's big thing, people have talked about the zone of proximal development. And the way that works in is that as kids are learning something and they're constructing some knowledge, the job of the educator then is to put something just a little bit, just far enough away, not too easy, not too far, so it's so hard, but just far enough away where they're able to work at it realistically, get the information, reconstruct their knowledge, add to the schema, and move on. And that's a part of iterative learning too. I mean, it's just so I think the important thing of what we're doing is that we're not making stuff up here. We're looking and saying, all right, so what does the body do? What do we do? And what do we do in an ecological model? What do we do in relationship to other people around us? And so much of teaching we talk about in terms of the teacher-student dyad, the student-parent-child dyad. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's how do you look at the layers that wrap around that? And some of that is cultural, what's going on with the family. A lot of times it could be, what is the school system forcing the teachers to do? What could the people on TV getting the people in the school committee excited about that force the superintendents, that force the teachers? And it also could be something like academia. Academia comes up with a great idea and they're like, this year, we're trying, what's that thing in California where they go from reading stuff, whole word to phonics, and they go back every 5 years there's a battle, and at some point they say, well, they're both helpful depending on the kid. But
Yes,
it
I
becomes
remember when I was young, in Texas, I started reading during a time where we were not learning phonics. And my mom used to joke that like that's why it took me longer to learn how to spell is because I didn't learn phonics at all, which it never made a difference in the end, it made no difference in my high school career or anything. But yeah, just like you're saying, it's just what are the expectations of the teachers, the superintendent, the state education
right.
department that year could be wildly different than 5
Yeah.
years from then.
Well, let me throw one more in there too. The sales rep. People don't talk about that, but the sales rep who comes to the school and says, "I've got a great new reading program." One of them I did as a teacher, as a math teacher. I had to do Success for All, teaching kids to read. I had that one period a day, so the whole school worked
Okay.
on literacy, and that was not a state mandated thing. That was, ooh, let's find a good vendor, and so SFA came in and that was our training partner. And so a lot of times it's part of the outer layers that influence what's happening to the kid, and that teacher, student, dyad, and then the parent and child and that whole experience can come from there, or it could come from learning bodies like Common Core standards. And then parents are like, I don't know what they're talking about. Then the teachers didn't even want to change to learn how wonderful it was. But teachers never learned what it is in order to acknowledge it, accept it. And the people who wrote the initial books for it didn't understand what it was. They were just making money writing new books. And so, there's this whole multiple layers, and it creates this horrible melange zeitgeist of nightmare that can happen for just a little kid and a teacher together inside of this great big world. And they're just there like two peas in a pod, and they've got to support each other and protect each other. And we often lose that dynamic because we think of it as two different sides of the tennis court when they're really sitting next to each other at the same table and need each other and supporting each other.
And I'm wondering too, you talk about behavior as communication, not compliance, but what does that really mean and what does that look like in practice? And thinking about the teacher and the student, two peas in a pod, right? So like what does that
Right.
mean?
So I can easily go back to
Sure, yeah.
the dyslexic student. And I tried to touch on that a little bit. So if a student is really struggling to learn how to just neatly organize a page the way that the teacher wants them to do it and write it down exactly, then the assumption is that they're being brats. They're being non-compliant. They have opposition defiance disorder or something like that, right? But the reality is that the teacher hasn't looked and asked in a curious way, why are they not doing this outside of them being horrible creatures put on earth to destroy my life? I mean,
Right.
there's a reason why. And so what is it? So in this case, it was a dyslexic learner who really had another way to do things. It's like you don't try to get your car to slide sideways, right? You got to let the wheels move forward and then turn and let it move the way it does. And so you can't force a kid to move in a direction that they're not built to do. And so that's, if I can bring together that example from before, I think that explains it. And if you look at that more often, there's a lot of theorists going back to the 80s, 90s, they started looking at things culturally, like is a kid acting bad because they're just raised poorly? But it turns out, well, they're hungry and they can't concentrate and they can't really focus. So teachers would find, you know what? I'll bring some snacks in, give the kids some food. They come back to life, and about 20 minutes later, they're wonderful students. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. And
so we
I'm
just
thinking about too, like just the idea of behavior as communication is like it's data, right? Like how a student is acting, that's data for teachers to investigate and for us
right,
to remove our assumptions from why that's happening. Because that could be a student without an actual diagnosis for a learning disability that the student or family or teacher doesn't know yet, right? Because they're
right,
masking it and they're not at the level where they need an additional plan yet. But if, as teachers, we are assuming or putting cultural expectations on that student instead of trying to investigate why this is happening, it's really a detriment to everybody at that point.
yes, 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 and yes, and yes! Exclamation point.
Yes. Well, tell us about some of the tools that Spiral We is building. So we have Spiral Insight, Spiral Lens, and how do they help teachers?
So we talked about the spiral lens, which is really the first thing as teachers learning how to see kids in a more open way, like we've just had a wonderful conversation about. So the next thing we're doing, and I have my nose down 9 hours a day right now before my students start back up again, writing some software where teachers can put in their students only using pseudonyms. You cannot put a child's name into it, and start taking journal entries. And so it has voice transcription, so you can talk into it. Meryl was being a problem student today. Excuse me, Dr. Meryl was being a
That's
problem
right.
student today in class, and she was squirming and couldn't sit in her desk, and she was looking out the window while I was doing my instructions. I'm not sure what to do. Save, right? But the cool thing we're doing here is we're building up a knowledge system, an interactive knowledge system here, where it takes that information and it then compares it to a database, and made a database. So far, we have about 1,000 articles of research with education, twice exceptionality, classroom management, and just basic things of understanding. And we've parsed this data so that it looks at traits, looks at suggestions, and it returns a set of suggestions back to the teacher. And the assumptions are not that these are necessarily the answers. And I'm not convinced that answers in research are always the answers, but it's a starting point. And the teacher then has the ability to continue that conversation with, you know what, I'm going to try the second suggestion, plus I'm going to try this other thing, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. So you go, you try it, come back, and you talk to your software and be like, all right, well, I tried to find a more interesting conversation point for Dr. Meryl while I was in the podcast with her. And when I changed that conversation point, I found that she wasn't looking out the window. And so my fix was to change my conversation point with her. So I saved that, and then that gets saved in the system as, first of all, recognizing the traits, which is Dr. Meryl was looking out the window and was distracted and kind of had a bored look on her face. There were some different suggestions on how to work on it, and then there was one that actually worked. So there's a strategy, and the strategy is saved as successful.
Okay.
And so that gets saved. And then at the end of the week, there's a summary of what you've done, and you can look back at it. And you can use that for in the moment, proximal solutions, or go back to planning and modify your planning. Be like, I actually have a whole class of Dr. Merrills who get bored with that. Maybe I should just leave that little piece off and come back and talk about the other thing. Or it could be any of the other fixes we look at in working with exceptional children.
You were just explaining that was the spiral lens tool, right?
Right. It's actually the Spiral Insight.
Well, that's Spiral Insight. Okay, so that's the
Spiral
Spiral
Insight.
Insight tool.
Yes.
And
Spiral lens
so,
is a perspective. Think of it like the telescope, right? Or is how you look at the world.
got it.
Through
So
spiral
Spiral
lens.
Lens, the perspective, and then Spiral Insight, the actual tool that can help
Right.
with using that perspective with
Right.
approach to students.
Right. And then to go along with that, there are two things. A tool that, if you haven't minimally listened to this podcast, right? And Dr. Ornstein Karen is building an education program about this process so that we're starting with teachers can go in and learn about this process and learn how to use the tool. So that's a piece of it here. So it's not just here's some software, good luck. And the other part too is that we're building a community. And so with this, teachers can then meet in a separate online community and discuss what is or isn't working based on these things and share it. And to go along with that, with this expert knowledge system, my expectation is that of all of the research-based fixes that we preload the system with, we'll probably hold on to maybe 15 or 20% of them. But the real solutions are going to come from real practitioners who are doing things and really making stuff happen. And if you think about it, I think what we're doing is we're using iteration as a new form of research methodology. So it's not just, pre-designing a quantitative measurement or qualitative where we're doing a collection of stories and insights, but here we're building a working, growing knowledge base of what teachers are doing and what works and in what situations. And then we can build this really powerful thing, and it's all powered with a small chunk of artificial intelligence using ChatGPT. And we're doing it in a way so that I want to make this clear is that, A, there's no private information going in about the student. And And the fixes, the only thing that's centrally stored are the attempted solutions and resolutions, because that's important because we want everybody. And the hope is to have thousands of teachers using this. And that is really a powerful hive mind. And so what we're really doing here is building a hive mind of teachers working in partnership through adaptive connection and building that relationship between themselves and the learner. And this is why I don't mind working morning, noon, and night on this, because we're both so excited that this is really going to change education, and we feel that we're early to this using AI. While a lot of people are still nervous about it, there are going to be people that be like, I don't trust it. Okay, fine, don't. If you want, we're designing some paper journals for them to use and take notes and work in the community. But for those that do embrace it, it's going to be there. And the one thing I say about using AI for these tools is that within 5 years, just about everything we use is going to be fully integrated with AI, probably down to our toothbrush. I joke around, right? I mean,
Yes.
think about even our ovens. I just got a new oven and it's connected to the internet. Like, I don't know.
Ovens now, okay.
Yeah. So,
But I agree where it's like, well, we might as well jump in. There is no sooner time to figure this out. So
yeah. And to be owners of it. And back to the word iteration again, is that what's really special about this is that AI is not the master in this. AI is an iteration partner. And for those of us who work with AI, one of the things that we know is that it's going to be pretty wrong a lot of times. And a really good example for me is working with a twice exceptional student, because you have this brilliant machine that can find all kinds of information, but there's this asynchrony to it, which is that it makes a lot of mistakes. And it's up to us to treat it like a partner, as a companion. And so that's one of our companions. And then also the community is a companion, and the teacher training. So we actually have this nice, complete community that comes together that supports each other. So we have the theory, we have the teaching of it, and we have the community that comes together to make it work. And that's our vision on this. And this is what keeps us going 24 hours a day.
Well, I can see why. I find it super fascinating, and I'm glad y'all are putting the work into it, and I'm happy to continue to uplift the work. I think it's going to be really impactful. When do you see Spiral Insight launching for more widespread use, and how can people get connected if they're interested in learning more?
I don't want to rush the rollout of it. I feel like I'll be ready for the beta in the fall. I'm going to start looking for people to sign up for the beta, and they should email me at barry.gelston@spiralwe.com. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing, we have a regular Substack. And so we've been writing articles around all of these issues, which is spiralwe.substack.com. So that's a good way to connect with us, and love to hear from you. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. So there's a lot of places where in your favorite social media where you can grab a hold of us and say, hey, I want to learn more, or I want to be in the beta group. And we really want to be a part of helping you figure this out in the beta, because we're not going to, if you're in the beta group, yes, you're in for life and you have a free license forever to do all of this. So it will be, it's going to be so exciting that we're going to need to limit the number of people that we allow.
Right.
In the beta
You're going to
group.
get a lot of interested people. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm trying not to, this is the first time I'm saying this in public, because I'm kind of protective of this idea. And I feel like I've just broken non-disclosure agreements.
To yourself?
So, yes. So it's in the public now, which means that, the clock is ticking even faster. So we got to get it out there, and we want to make a difference.
No sooner time to talk about it, I think. So I will make sure that everything is linked here in the description, as well as on hex24press.com, so listeners can get connected with you and the work that you are doing. So I'm also just wondering, as we wrap up, it's really been wonderful to dig in more with you here, but thinking about all this work and the future of this work, what is really bringing you hope? What's driving you every day to continue this work?
It really is the vision from this work. And it's interesting, as you asked me this question before, and it was more generic, and I gave you more of a generic answer. But while we're really focusing in on this, is that I'm really excited that we're we could make a real difference for teachers to get to this other part of teaching that we really don't talk that much about, which is in the moment adaptation, micro classroom management that's iterative and all that. And that really gives me hope because I really feel that we can make a difference in teaching. And I feel that, and I said this the last time too, that I feel that there's a big change happening in education right now that's non-institutional. And it's getting smaller and it's becoming more individual and more planned and that we're creating a new synthesis of, we went from the everybody homeschooled to everybody institutionally educated. And now we're getting this mix and choice and options where we're actively looking at homeschooling or alternative schooling or how do we mix all of that together. And people are taking charge and ownership of their personal education and their children's education. And that really is exciting for me.
And it's exciting that people are having more choice and having more options as AI expands too, for the human partnership with AI to really support students and teachers and families in a new way. So the work you guys are doing is giving me hope too. So it's really exciting. Yes.
Hey, thanks, Meryl.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for spending some more time with me. I'd love to catch up here in a few months again and talk about just progress and how things are going. And continue the conversation. So thanks, Barry.
And thank you. This is a lot of fun, and it's great to be with a fellow educator who gets it and loves education and loves kids and the whole process. And so we're very lucky to have Exceptionally Speaking here and Hex 24 making a difference. So thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure. Talk to you soon.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.